Wargaming Campaigns by Henry Hyde. It has been a while since we've done a proper multi-episode soup to nuts wargaming campaign, and we're going to rectify that starting right now. We're going to use Henry Hyde's wargaming campaigns. We're going to lean very heavily on this one. In the past, we have used, Biscotti's excited too. In the past, we've used William Sylvester's The Solo Wargaming Guide. And if you're new to wargame campaigns, I recommend you get this, even if you're not doing a solo campaign, because this starts you off at the very beginning. Hey, guys, grab yourself a map. Now, in the past, we've done die drop maps. We're going to use a little different process to generate our map today. But he walks you through how to set up your orders of battle, how many troops there are, how fast they move, some simple ways to do weather, simple ways to do set up deployment zones, and all of that. If you're new, I recommend you use this. But we've used it a couple of times. We're not going to use it today. We're going to go with Henry Hyde's wargaming campaigns. And as I said, this is quite a magnum opus for Henry Hyde, although it's his second magnum opus, which can you pluralize those? Can you have two magnum opuses? It's opuses. Either way, the problem with wargaming campaigns is that it is chock full of half-baked ideas. But that's not necessarily a problem. That's also a benefit, because what you are free to do is take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. You take this half-baked idea, throw it in a blender, see what comes out. Sometimes it's going to blow up in your face. The blender's going to catch fire and you're going to burn down your house. But other times you're going to wind up with a delicious meal. Hopefully this will be the latter. I should warn you, I don't know what era we're going to be wargaming in just yet. The first thing I want to do is generate a map. I do know that we're going to be planet-side. Now, we've used a lot of different methods to generate maps. We've used die drop methods. I used the Gary Gygax's random terrain generator from the Dungeon Master's Guide of 1st edition AD&D. We did star maps using the Proto-Traveler 1977 generation method. And I want to try something a little bit different. This does owe a little something to the local terrain system found in the Solo Wargaming Guide. I had to go back and grab it again. I thought I was done with it, but I'm not. In which you lay out a matrix of cards, and then they'll see like that. See, this is what we're going to do. But we're going to use a slightly different system. Before we get to that, let's just take a look at some of the other half-baked ideas that Henry recommends you might want to use. Oh, there we go. The Jim Webster approach also uses cards. That's not the one we're going to use. The map, take a deck of playing cards, but let's take a look at it real quick. Remove the court cards and jokers. Place one card face up. In this case, what you're doing is you're figuring out how big each of the cities are. This is for not necessarily a hex crawl, it's for a point crawl, where these are all connected vertically, horizontally, but not diagonally. And you start in the center, and the size of the card, this is like the capital city, I guess. And that's the higher the card, the bigger the community. So 2s and 3s are going to be little villages, and you're going to be able to move from card to card, and the face cards will be great big honking cities, right? So this is called Shechem, but that's just for the settlements. So maybe we'll use that as our step for settlements themselves. But Henry offers you another alternative. He suggests that, this would make a good point crawl map right there, if you ask me. That's a map of the tube. But on page 152 is where we begin. And here's a couple of other ideas. Now, I've done the die drop map. I've seen people do a rice drop map where they throw a handful of rice, they let it go an inch above the table, actually above a butcher's paper, and they just outline where the furthest reaches of rice are. And if there's some out here, that little outline around 8 pieces of rice might form an island. Provides a nice fractal jagged coastline. You can also take an existing isle. I don't know, is this the Isle of Man? I don't recognize it. Blow it up to 10 times normal size, carve it up in individual countries. Right? Landforms are fractal. Here, Henry has taken I recognize these countries. This is Russia. See, there's the Crimea. It's part of Russia. And then here's Italy and Great Britain right next to each other, and it forms this, what he calls incontinentia. Wherever the two countries' coastlines don't match up, or borders, in the case of a landlocked country, he puts a mountain range. So here between upside-down Great Britain and the Italy boot, mountain range. And then over here between some of these, my geography's not great. There's a little lake between these two countries. Is that Switzerland, maybe? I don't know. You can also, so he has a whole like imaginations. I wonder if I can find the map that he shows here. He has a whole imaginations campaign. He's been working on it for decades. I am always very impressed with guys that have that level of like dedication to a single world and a single map. I enjoy the creation so much that after a while I get bored and I want to do it again. So here's an example of, I think this is a portion of his world, Chemshaven, or Kemshaven. Here's Oltendorf, and then Dahlia and Chindristan. When he wants to generate a new map, he just says, oh yeah, there's another continent on my imaginations map. And then he recommends also, there are plenty of generators online you can use. Maybe use a historic map of Spain. See, these indicate slopes. This is public domain. You can just drop this directly into your map. Who's going to stop you? And there's Dahlia again, with the colors here represent elevations. So there's a nice big mountain here. Here's a mountain range. And then this is just ripe for some colonial era gaming. Ooh, we love it. But the system we're going to use today here, shortly, is this system, which comes to him. He actually name checks where he got this from. I take it back. He shows us the Tony Bath method, which uses die rolls, very similar to Gary Gygax. Then he says it would be possible to create terrain using a shuffled pack of cards. And that's what he's done here. We're using the Henry Hyde map generation system. So I don't know how big our map is going to be yet, but the way we're going to generate landforms, I'm using my Royal Hawaiian deck of cards. There's old Queen Liliuokalani and King Kalakaua. What we're going to do is we're going to lay out a grid, 6 across by 4 down. And anytime we have now let me just read you Henry's way of doing it. I'm going to modify this slightly. The cards valued 2 to 5 on the red cards are flat land, 6 to 10 are hills, and the face cards are mountains. That gives you a 4 of the cards are going to be flat and 5 are going to be hills. I want more flat, less hills. Because I know I'm going to have, well, look, right? If we've got 12 cards, 4 hills, 1 in 3 will be mountains, 1 in 3 will be hills, and the other 6 will be flat. I think that's going to make things far more manageable, especially considering that after you've laid your red cards out in a 4x6 grid, you lay out your black cards. And the black cards are what kind of landforms you have. So if you have a 2 to 5, it's just bare plains, bare terrain. Could be bare mountains, could be bare plains, could be bare hills. 6 to 10 are woods, and the face cards are forests. Now, I hear you asking, what about the aces? Aces are special cards. Those are the wild cards. You get to do what you want with them. We may make the 2 aces, the 2 red aces will be depressions. Maybe they'll be bodies of water, inland lakes. The 2 black aces will be maybe swamps. I'm not quite sure yet. But I am going to leave the jokers in here, because I want the jokers. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to hold off on that. If I have a joker, I'm just going to get rid of it and redeal. So that is how we're going to generate our 2 maps, and it's as simple as taking I'm going to do them one at a time. I have now fully shuffled the deck. Let me cut it, and then we'll cut it one more time just to keep myself honest. And I'm going to go 3 across the top and 4 down. So we'll actually go 6 across the top instead of doing 1 page at a time. There's our joker. I'm going to pull him out, push these over. So ace is going to be up north. We may wind up linking the 2 aces, if we get that second one, with a river. And wouldn't you know it, there's our second ace. And we may have to have that river might wind up being a fairly substantial. There you go. So that's what our landforms look like. We have a very mountainous southwest. We've got 1 peak over here. And then, wouldn't you know it, our river cuts through the pass between those peaks. Now, I would suggest that this may wind up being another pass through here, and we'll have to see what our landforms look like. But as you can see already, we've got an interesting map. We then repeat the process using the black cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we go across the top for this western side. And we'll repeat this one last time for the settlements, and we'll throw the jokers back in the deck Again, we don't need no joker just yet. And there is going to be our, so any card that is 2 through 5 has no terrain. The 6 through 10 are woods, and picture cards are heavy forests. Before we put these two things together to make sense of this, I'm going to go ahead and just declare I want the 6s to be open. It's called bare, but it's really going to be grasslands. We're going to go with kind of a standard European battle mat system here. And by doing that, we're going to give ourselves more room for the armies to navigate, particularly because we have so many mountains. And I think the difference between woods and forests, these face cards, are really slow going. So we have another set of boundaries here to slow our armies down. Then you just take your grid, and you can see here, I paired it up. So we've got up here in the far left-hand corner, we've got hilly, what is that? Yeah, that's hilly woods. And down here, notice we got a couple of aces down in the bottom corner right next to our lake. So I said, oh, let's make both of those swamps. And that way we've got some swampy area that's, again, going to slow things way down. There may be some settlements, which would lead to some causeways through there. And then, of course, with our mountain range running through here, I said, look, well, these 3 mountains are all bare. And this one has a forest on it. So wherever I have the woods on the mountains, those mountains will be below the tree line, meaning they're going to be lower mountains. This mountain up here is bare, so that means it's going to be high mountains, impassable. And ultimately what you wind up with is a map that looks a little something like this. We've got our bay with a lake. Now we have a couple of things we have to think about here. Our lake occurs on the same card as heavy forest. Does that mean you've got a ring of heavy woods around the lake? Not necessarily. I think it means that there is, well, if we look at kind of the landform, this is clearly highland. Our swamp kind of drains into the lake. There may be some riparian habitat there along that, some kind of, boundary. But it's going to be a fairly calm lake, and then it's going to share, and as you can see, we've got some heavy woods, hilly woods, more plains over here. So again, this is a little bit lower. We've got wooded area up here. And I think it's important to recognize that this part of the map is not covered with woods. It's just a wooded area. So any one of these areas, and again, the mountain range might not span the entire sector, if you will. There may be another pass through these mountains. But for the most part, what we have here is a map with it's almost bisected by a fully defensible river. We've got a mountain range and a big pass through here that's going to be hard to control. And then we've got another little mountain range down here. And again, this mountain range, as you can see, it's just wooded. So it's going to be fairly low mountains. And then we've got some grassy hills down in this corner. So there's a couple of other things we have to add to this map yet. We have to add settlements. We got to figure out our capitals. And we may even drop a few more resource points down, like silver mines. Those would be worth going to war over. By combining those two sets of cards, we wind up with a sketch map that looks a little something like this. Now, this is not the final deal yet. As we refine this down, we can make some minor changes. I don't know how wide this pass is, but let me explain the thinking behind this map. Wherever, for example, we had high mountains that were bare, well, wherever we had mountains that were bare, I said, oh, those must be high mountains. They're above the tree line, they extend above the tree line, so these really block movement. There may be 1 or 2 passes through there, I'm not sure yet. So we have more high mountains down here, and this mountain range that was a little diagonal, so this was forested and wooded. And I think the thing to point out is that forested is really dense, old growth, like Falda Gap style woods, whereas the wooded areas are just kind of gently wooded. These are more like 100-acre woods. These are the more pastoral, if you will. Although pastoral woods, is that really a thing? Anyway, so these mountains are fairly low, but we have a pass. Now, I don't know how wide this pass is. We'll get to that. As I said, the 2 aces down here in the corner, those are going to be a swamp. And then we have kind of a hazy coastline down here where the swamp drains into the lake. And as you can see, we've got highlands up here, and then we have a lot of grassy plains down here along the river. So I've connected the lake with the bay, and again, the bay is forested. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think that means we've got some heavy old growth forest along the shores of the bay, but there's probably at least one settlement down here. This is a really good place for a city. We're going to get to cities in a second. But I think the thing to key in on now is we need to populate our land. And if you can see this reddish line right here, this is going to separate our belligerents. Everybody north of the line will be one of our belligerents, and everybody south will be another. And I drew the line through the mountains like this for an important reason, because the settlements up on these two quadrants, it's not quadrants, sectors is probably a better word, will be part of this southern nation, and then the two cities over here will be part of the northern nation. The lake is controlled and dominated by the southern nation, but it looks like, this side of the mountains and maybe the pass through the mountains, and this is obviously a frontier. I did add a river. I said these high mountains, this is clearly some kind of basin that must drain down to the lake and forest. So these two rivers are going to be very important for both limiting the movement of troops north and south in the case of this river, but also for transporting them east to west, and then vice versa up here. So, as I said, we now need to figure out how many people live here. And in order to keep this balanced, in the past, we've seen cases where using purely random dice roll methods leads to one of our nations being heavily populated and one being lightly populated. Doesn't make for a very fair fight. We can make this a fair fight by giving everybody the same number of people. And the way we're going to do that is, I have 12 cards, 12 red and 12 black. And I'm going to play a card on each of our sectors, 12 for the south, 12 for the north, and we'll call the red in the south and the black in the north. And these cards are of a given suit, 2 through king. Now the king, jack, and queen will be the major metropolitan areas. The king, where this lands, will determine where the capital is. And then we have these two smaller cities, and then again, 10 is a smaller city, and basically 2 through 5 will be lightly populated areas. So we may just drop a single village in each of those. In this manner, we have the same values in each of our little decks, so each nation will have the same number of people. Now, there will be, and of course, just from the geography, somebody here is going to have an advantage geographically, and there may be an advantage resource-wise, but I haven't calculated that. Let's populate first. So if I can, and the way and this is actually, again, just to turn our attention back to Henry Hyde, he name-checks the Jim Webster approach. And Jim Webster wanted to run a campaign that was in a Canaanite campaign. So this is the Jordan River, this is the Mediterranean, and he uses this same system. He deals out cards. Now he started here, and this is the home settlement. And then he dealt out the 8 cards around that, and then he shuffled in the face cards so that all of the major cities were at a distance from the center of the map. And for him, this is from the river to the sea. Shechem, I don't know how you pronounce that, is trying to be free. We're not going to do that, but we are going to use his advice, and these will be our settlements. And so let me just go ahead and deal them out. And as I said, everybody north of this red line, so we just, I guess let me shuffle these off camera. And then we will go ahead and cut them once just to be on the fair side. And I can't remember which one of these is black and red. So I'm going to start with the North Country first. And we get 9 to 6, 10, so fairly big city on the bay. And then we have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these two down here. So 8 and 4. Repeating the process with the red cards, one more cut just to be silly. We've got 2, 7, 10, 5, 8, and then the low mountains is going to be the capital. So the capital is somewhere down here. Maybe it's on a high rise overlooking and dominating that river. I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So curiously enough, for the Black Nation, high mountains got a 2. So these are lightly populated. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of resources are up there. Let me write these numbers down on the map, and we'll take a look at what this means. what do we notice here? Well, we've got a big city for the Southern Kingdom right here in the low mountains. I think it's going to be overlooking the river here. You've got a choke point, so all the trade that's coming down to the sea has to go through the capital of this country and pay huge taxes, which maybe the northern country kind of resents. Now, the northern country has cities on this side of the mountain. That's what the 8 and the Queen are. I'm still not sure how big those are. Whereas it looks like the capital of this northern confederation is right here in the center of this, probably going to wind up being an agricultural land. But now we're going to go ahead and dump some resources, and we'll begin to do some more economics. This is uncharted waters for me as a wargamer, but fortunately, Henry is here to help. One last thing I'll point out before we turn away from this page, Jim Webster also writes the wonderful series, basically it's Hellfire. It's a science fiction series. I've got 2 of his campaign books, and I leaf through them looking for help. Hell by Starlight is one of them, and Hellfire Campaigns, I highly recommend them. You can get those, but I haven't really used them because they're a little odd. He says, here's the rule, and then he goes immediately into an example. It's a little light on the examples for how those things work, and that's why we're leaning a little heavier on Henry Hyde's guidance. And Henry offers us a rather simple economic system. And Henry goes to Tony Bath, which, again, I've got that here on my cell phone in digital format. Tony Bath says in setting up a War Games campaign, he used a simple system to place mineral deposits. For each hill or mountain square, roll a die. On a 5 or a 6, followed by a 4, 5, or 6, indicates the presence of a worthwhile vein of ore or other minerals. Now, that's a little odd, because why don't you just say roll, and on a 6, there's a vein of deposits? Come on, Tony, that's the way the math works. So we're going to do that. Conveniently enough, we have 6 mountain squares. 1 in 6 chance we should get at least one valuable mineral deposit that may wind up being a political goal or the strategy or the reason for the war. I don't know yet. So I'm going to start up here, and I rolled a 3, so nothing there. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I get nothing here. The little village has nothing. Queen City in the high mountains has nothing, and the low mountains, kind of a bigger city. Here's a mineral deposit. So I'm going to put a little star there. And then the capital city down here got nothing. To find out what kind of deposit we got, we have a little chart here. Look at that. We roll a D12. Let's see. It says use a D12 to the type, and then a number in a circle indicating the richness as determined by a pair of percentage dice. Okay. First, we roll to find out what kind of mine it is. And with a 2, look at that, it is a silver mine. Then we roll percentile dice, and the higher the number, the better. 41, so we have a 41 silver mine. I'm not quite sure what that means just yet. But the next thing we're going to look at is income generated not only by the mineral wealth, but the various terrain types. So here we have a list. And this is, now he calls them thaler, but I'm just going to call it, dollars or gold. Let's just call it gold. So wherever we have cultivated land, you get 1,000. Riverbanks is 1,200. Plains is 800, 500. As you can see, woods and forests reach 500. And then the only coast or ocean that we have, we don't have any ocean at all. The only coast we have, of course, is, here we go. It's 100 percentage points on the dice roll. Well, the only coast we have is that bay. After running the numbers, and I should point out, there's no entry for swamps. So I took the lowest entry on this list, which would be open ocean or the mountains, 400. So we're going to go 100 less than that. So these 2 swamp areas only generate 300 gold per year. I gave the control of the forest to the southern nation, so that makes this 12, 12, 1,200 here. And that's to kind of compensate for the fact that our northern nation has that silver mine, which generates 4,100 gold per year. So by kind of giving these guys that artificial bump in finances, they wind up with 9,600 a year. And even with that bump, they're still outproduced by, 2,900? 1,900? 1,600. About 20%. So it's 11.5 for the guys up here in the north. And again, that 11.5 is due in large part to the silver mine. That's going to be a vital part of our war, I'm sure. Next, we turn our attention to population. Again, we've got a nice little chart in Henry Hyde's Wargaming campaigns that says your regional capital will have 100,000 people. All of your major towns will have 25,000. Cultivated areas will have 5. Well, why did we generate the population? I guess this is probably like taxable population. The mines will give our low mountain city an extra 250 boost. The bay is going to generate 1,500 for the population, and kind of mixing and matching here, aren't we? Let's run the numbers, see what happens. It came out a little bit too lopsided in favor of the boys in the north because of this 4,100 extra gold per year for the silver mine. And it's in the center of the map. It's right on the border. That's going to be a really important part of this war, I think. What I did to kind of juice the numbers just a little bit, and I think we're justified, there's numbers here for both hills and mountains and riverbanks. So to kind of juice, and one of the other reasons the Southern nation takes it on the chin is you've got 2 swamp squares in the south. And I assigned them a value of 300. That is 100 lower than the lowest on this chart. So even though 9,000 people live in the swamp, and spoiler alert, the numbers that we have here are the thousands of people that live in that area. And so even though 9,000 people live in both of these, they both generate effectively 300 units. And we're going to call those units our taxation. Now, as far as population, so to juice the numbers, I said, well, this hilly forest, instead of generating 500, I'm going to call that riverbanks. And that generates like another 777 for these guys. And as a result, we wind up with 9,600 versus 11,500. So still, a good 10, about 15% higher income for these boys here in the north. And again, largely due to that silver mine. Now, for population, Henry says, well, we're going to go with this situation where your regional capital has 100,000 people. Major towns, this would be where we played the queen or the jack, will have 25,000. And then your cultivated area has, well, wait a minute. So I have a cultivated area here that I dealt a 5 card for. And that's because we're mixing and matching. I warned you that this book is a collection of half-baked ideas. And this is a case where we're trying to jam that square peg into the round hole, and it doesn't work. We used Jim Webster's method for population, so we're not going to use Henry's method for population. Well, kind of we are, because I'm going to stick with 100,000 for the regional capitals, both the north and the south. And I'm going to stick with 25 for the jack and the queen, and then whatever the value of the number is here, that's how many thousands of people live there. So this forest plain in the south, there's 10,000 people that are cutting lumber here in the forest. And they're probably shipping it downriver to Lake Town and then out to sea, or to the rivals to the north. And what that means is that both of these groups are going to wind up with population numbers of about 202,000 people. And we will assume that half of those are men. So that gives us about 100,000. But of those, and here's where we get it, right? So Henry says, what do we got here? Needs raised, taxation is period to be raised in a household. So we assume that half are men. 10% of that would be eligible to fight. Well, okay. So if we have 100,000 adult men, and that's a little high perhaps, but that means that each of our armies is going to have about 10,000 men that it can call up. Why would they do that? To answer that, we need to understand the politics of these two countries. And so we turn our attention to Chapter 6, We the People, which is really about personality-driven campaigns. Henry offers us a number of different methods for introducing characters, and I'm going to use this section for developing the politics of the situation. There is advice in this section for guy from such masters as Bruce Quarry, and who is this? Tony Bath. He used a deck of cards to generate personalities for nobility, leaders. But we're instead going to look at, which of the Grants is it? Other past master of campaigning to whom I wish to refer as Charles S. Grant, son of Charles Grant of the Wargame fame. So Charles Grant gives us these couple of little tables. And we can find out what the ruling regime is and what the opposition party is. Notice there's 11 of those, so I have a deck of cards. Very simple. I just pulled out. I've got the ace through the jack, and we can shuffle that up and draw 2 cards, and that'll tell us. Let's start with a northern country and find out what their posture is. It is ruled by a regent, fair, loyal, and trusted. And he is opposed by a strong opposition, the rightful ruler in exile, who is popular. Then I have the ace through 9 of spades, and I will shuffle that up, and here we have our national posture. So let's find out what the international policy of the northern country is. And with a 5, we get uncoordinated and erratic, which makes sense because you've got a trusted regent who has one idea and a popular leader in exile, relatable, at least for those of us here in America, who has his ideas. And so you have this situation where the government is split. Now let's find out what's going on with the southern country. I deal out a card for the leadership. We get an 8, a regent, unpopular, dishonest, and repressive. And he is opposed by a single, strong, popular, democratic, and lawful government or party. And their national policy is pragmatic and expansionist. I think the southern country is going to be the instigator of this war. And that is really about all we have time for today. I've gone ahead and drawn up a better version of the map. I'll have to scan this, clean it up. As you can see, I've got my road networks down. Dashed lines are unimproved roads. These rivers are going to be the major routes carrying people and cargo and goods. Notice that I've put our silver mine up a little valley here, and then there is one road down. Oh, it's just a small town, but all silver goes straight to the capital. Interestingly enough, as we said, the river traffic is largely controlled by the towns on the southern side. Well, of course, once we hit this mountain, once we hit this pass through the mountains, everything to the south of the mountains belongs to the southern country, including number 10 here. Now, there's no passes through the mountains. So our war is going to be largely fought, in this gap right here between these mountains. But notice, because the southern nation controls this river, they may launch frequent raids and they may be intercepting caravans of silver. Possibly. Now, again, we don't even know what era or genre of wargame we're going to face. But what we do know is that this country is riven by political strife, although, and there's a little bit of an interesting contrast here. It's led by a fair and loyal regent, but the rightful ruler, if he's fair and loyal, the rightful ruler is in exile. So he may not be around, and he may take this opportunity of warfare to show up. But that's kind of the political situation there. And of course, down here in the south, you've got an unpopular, dishonest, and repressive government who is probably looking for a reason to twist the screws on the population, particularly given that they are much more likely to support the strong, popular Democratic leader. They need to be crushed. And what better way to do that than to gin up a threat like those guys from the north, enlist all of the eligible fighting age men and send them north so that they will spend their lives fighting the country to the north rather than rising up in revolt against you. We got ourselves a campaign here, fellas. I made the lake, Long Lake over here. I don't know what I'm going to call it here. This is our big lake. This is the bay. And then, as you can see, I went ahead and put a couple of these are the big, heavy forests that block movement. You can move cross-country. Here's the other big forest. I haven't named anything yet. We'll wait until we find out what our genre is. And again, we've got some unimproved roads, good roads taking you to the rivers. And I think riverine traffic is going to be very heavy in this campaign, depending on what actually pops off. Now, I would recommend you take a look at Jim Webster's Hellfire campaigns. He's got some excellent ideas about how to generate conflict that naturally develops from political situations. And he has a little random number style. He uses cards and dice where you basically come up with a little conflict, and then you come up with 6 possibilities, with 1 being the situation resolves itself fairly well, and 6 being the situation gets progressively worse. And you just keep rolling, and you just kind of step through like we've done on the channel before, where you've got your conflict, and as long as you're rolling high numbers, things get worse and worse and worse, and you just check through your decision tree until the shots are fired. And we'll talk more about what kind of genre we have and what kind of forces we have. We know that we're going to have about 10,000 guys on a side, but how much of that is mechanized? Do we have artillery? We do know where our larger cities are, so that will help. We'll use those as our chief rallying points. Those may be our industrial base. We've got a lot more to go before we get to any battles. So take a look, keep an eye out for that video coming up soon, and until then, I'm praying for you.